The sky over Cinder 9 didn't just break it, screamed. It was a 60,000-year silence broken by a single human shout, a jagged frequency that tore through the Hegemony's dampening fields like a physical blade. Solara felt it in the core of her spectral form, a vibration so dense and messy it could only belong to one species. It was loud, it was defiant, and it was exactly what the ancient laws of the deep stars had been waiting for. Solara Xylos, Archon of the Lumen, knelt on the scorched ash of the moon. Her light was fading, suppressed by the heavy iron shackles that bound her wrists. Above her, the Hegemony of ages had gathered their grandest judges. They were beings of cold mathematics and rigid cycles, ancient things that had forgotten the taste of air. They had spent the last hour reciting her crimes in a rhythmic drone that felt like the slow grinding of tectonic plates. To them, she was a variable to be erased, an error in the grand equation of their stability. In fact, the executioner had already raised the pulse blade when the resolute spark punched through the atmosphere. The ship was an ugly, thing-a-scarred cargo hauler that looked like it had been held together by nothing but stubbornness and heavy-grade welds. It didn't belong here. This was a place of high ceremony and higher death. Yet there it was, venting heat and dropping toward the surface with a terrifying lack of grace. The broadcast hit every receiver on the moon simultaneously. It wasn't a request for parley. It wasn't a threat. It was a data dump of such staggering proportions that the Hegemony's logic cores staggered under the weight. Commander Jax Thorne's voice crackled through the comms, sounding breathless and far too casual for a man staring down 3 dreadnoughts. He said the words that Solara hadn't heard in 5 lifetimes. He triggered the Terran archive. The law is a shield, Jax had told her once, back when they were hiding in the asteroid belts of the Reach. But courage is the sword. At the time, she hadn't understood. The Lumen lived by the flow of light and the grace of the nebula. They didn't understand swords, but watching that battered ship hover between her and a firing squad, the truth of it burned. Every Hegemony terminal flickered. The archive wasn't just history. It was the legal DNA of the galaxy before the Hegemony had rewritten the rules. It contained the Sanctuary Clause, a forgotten pact signed by the progenitors that mandated an immediate cessation of hostilities for any race capable of proving their cultural lineage. It was a loophole the size of a sun. Ironically, the Hegemony had spent eons burying this knowledge, thinking they were safe in their stasis. They didn't account for a species that treated a library like a weapon. They didn't account for the humans. Solara looked up at the resolute spark. She could see the heat stress on the hull. The ship was trembling, its shields barely holding against the gravity wells of the moon. It was a tiny thing, really, a speck of dust against the silver-scaled giants of the Hegemony fleet. "We are the beautiful chaos the ancient stars fear," Jax had whispered to her during their long transit from the Kale systems. He had been right. Humans were high entropy, unpredictable, and dangerously clever. The High Judge stepped forward, his voice a distorted rasp. He demanded to know why a primitive scavenger vessel thought it could halt the will of the ages. The answer didn't come in a speech. It came in the form of a target lock. The cargo ship's bay doors groaned open, revealing not weapons but a massive relay dish glowing with the stolen power of 1,000 suns. "Where we come from," Jax's voice returned, echoing across the ash. "Being enough is everything. And today, we're more than enough." The silver beams of the dreadnoughts finally lashed out, a concentrated strike meant to vaporize the resolute spark and everyone on it. But the ship didn't vanish. Instead, the space around the cargo hauler curdled into a static haze as the Sanctuary Clause took hold of the moon's automated defense grid. It was a glitch in the very reality the Hegemony had built. The ancient systems, buried under layers of modern cruelty, recognized the humans' data shout and refused to fire. Solara watched from the ash, her light flickering in rhythm with the ship's dying engines. The resolute spark was a bruised, rattling cage of metal, yet it stood its ground against 3 gods of war. It was madness. It was suicide. It was, as Jax had put it, the only way they knew how to be. Then the sky began to fill. It wasn't a military maneuver. It was a migration. One by one, Then by the dozen, the rusted hulls of Kale refugee ships began to drop out of warp. They were followed by something even more impossible. Hegemony frigates, with their colors stripped, their crews having finally seen a reason to stop following the script. The humans hadn't brought an army, they had brought a choice. The vibration in the ground changed. The heavy iron shackles on Solara's wrists groaned, then shattered, as the moon's central processor, now flooded with the Terran archive, reset itself to a time before the hegemony. Truth is, the bureaucracy of the ages was built on the assumption that everyone was too afraid to look at the old laws. They assumed the galaxy had forgotten how to be loud. Jax's ship took a grazing hit from a secondary battery, the hull buckling inward with a scream of metal. Solara felt the heat of it from the surface. She felt the desperate, frantic pulse of the human crew as they struggled to keep their life support from venting into the void. They were so fragile. Their lives lasted a heartbeat compared to her own, yet they spent those heartbeats like they were infinite. And then, the hegemony fleet simply stopped. The dreadnoughts drifted, their internal systems locked in a logic loop that no commander could override. The archive hadn't just provided a legal shield, it had acted as a virus of truth, showing the crews of the fleet exactly what their masters had erased from their history. The beautiful chaos had reached its boiling point. Solara rose from the ash, her light returning in a swell of gold and violet. She looked up at the resolute spark, which was now surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships, a protective shell of the broken and the brave. In the aftermath, they didn't plant a flag. They didn't declare a new empire. As the hegemony was dismantled by its own citizens, the humans simply began the work of moving the wounded. They didn't ask for a reward. They didn't wait for a ceremony. Weeks later, standing on the observation deck of the newly christened Terra Nova, Solara watched Jax Thorne try to patch a coolant leak with a piece of salvaged plating and a curse. He looked exhausted. He looked human. She asked him why he had risked his entire species' future for a single alien archon on a dead moon. He didn't even look up from his work. He just shrugged, the grease on his forehead catching the light of 3 setting suns. "Doing right is its own reward, Solara," he said, his voice quiet. "Around here, that's just how we keep the lights on." Solara realized then that the ancient stars didn't fear humanity because they were strong. They feared them because they were enough. And in a galaxy of cold equations, being enough was the most dangerous thing anyone could be.